Coming off the back of the COVID-19 pandemic, the World Health Organization is proposing a new pandemic treaty they are hoping will be accepted by enough member countries to become a reality by 2024. According to Dr. Tedros, the World Health Organization director, the COVID-19 pandemic has shone a light on the many flaws in the global system to protect people from pandemics. The most vulnerable people going without vaccines, health workers without needed equipment to perform their life-saving work, and me-first approaches that stymie the global solidarity needed to deal with a global threat. And the proposed pandemic treaty would aim to solve these issues. But when taking a deeper look at the treaty itself, there are a number of concerning things people of the world might want to consider before heading down this path. Here to break this down with me is Shabnam Palesa Mohamed, a member of the Steering Committee for the World Council for Health. All right, welcome, Shabnam. Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about what the World Health Organization Pandemic Treaty is?
So the World Health Organization intended or proposed pandemic treaty, as we understand it from the little bits of information coming out from the establishment, essentially gives the WHO an inordinate amount of power to make decisions in sovereign countries as to how people live and how they deal with pandemics, from lockdowns to mandates over treatments, and to really what people have started to consider a one-size-fits-all approach, which to date has actually not worked. And so this would be a direct threat on the sovereignty of a country to make decisions for itself. It's unnecessary, it's expensive, it's going to cost countries millions to participate in the treaty process, as well as really erode the foundations of democracy in each country, many of whom have actually not even heard about this proposed pandemic treaty that the WHO intends to impose on member states around the world.
And when are they looking at starting up this pandemic treaty?
So they've started the process last year with discussions. They've formed an intergovernmental negotiating body, and they've now formed a working group to decide how this process will work in terms of this treaty and getting the buy-in of the various member states, many of whom have already signed up to the commentary that was released. And of course, again, most countries don't know about this, but it certainly does present a very serious challenge to sovereignty. And I believe that they're going to, well, they intend to confirm the treaty at the World Health Assembly in 2024. Now, the reason why I say I believe, and I don't say so with certainty, is because we know that circumstances, whether true or not, could be used to expedite this treaty and say, well, it's urgent for us to actually put it into place now in 2022, again, without public participation, which in our view as the World Council for Health certainly means that it is undemocratic, it is unconstitutional, and therefore makes the treaty invalid and unlawful.
Right. Yeah. And so I think one of the questions here is like there's about 194 countries that are, part of the World Health Organization as member states. How is it that the World Health Organization in this case would make sure that whatever they set forth would end up being, I guess, by law, all of the 194 countries would have to participate?
Right. So they would need to go through a voting process at the World Health Assembly, and by a 2/3 majority can pass this treaty. But the other part that's very important to remember in terms of conventions and treaties signed via bodies like the WHO, which of course are not democratically elected, is that if a country signs up for the treaty and then decides it does not want to subscribe to this treaty, or it does not want to enforce that aspect of the treaty, sanctions can be imposed against that country, which of course has massive socio-political and socio-economic implications for any country that decides we actually don't subscribe to this anymore. We've seen what the WHO has done historically in terms of its many failures. Firstly, in terms of its track record, in terms of corruption, one can easily research the WHO and its history of corruption. And of course, Joe, that is intrinsically linked to conflict of interest. So if you've, of course, read the first open letter by the World Council for Health on the WHO's proposed pandemic treaty, you will see that we outlined the following: that the WHO cannot be allowed to control the world's health agenda nor enforce biosurveillance while it receives funding from public sources belonging to the people. It is caught in a perpetual conflict of interest because it also receives substantial funding from private interests that use their contributions to influence and profit from WHO decisions and mandates. And for example, of course, the Gates Foundation and the Gates-funded Gavi Vaccine Promotion Alliance contribute over 1 billion a year. So we're not dealing with a democratic institution or body that serves the needs of its people. And while this may be one treaty of many, Joe, that need to be challenged, it certainly is a way to bring people together to realize that the WHO should not be making any decisions about the world's health in future.
Yeah, I mean, it's the implications seem rather large here, and I wonder, this is a pandemic treaty, but is it possible that it could extend into other health measures as well, or is it only if some form of viral pandemic were to take place?
Well, while it does say it's pandemic preparedness and response, given the WHO's constitution, and I would like to read certain clauses from it to you, one understands the inordinate amount of power that this institution has and how this treaty can be used using the WHO's constitution to essentially make decisions about any aspects of health. If you look at Article 2 of the WHO's constitution, in order to achieve its objective, the functions of the organization shall be to act as the directing and coordinating authority on international health work, to propose conventions, agreements, regulations, make recommendations, to establish and revise as necessary nomenclature of diseases. So the naming of diseases, whether or not experts concur that this is in fact a new disease, whether it's a pandemic or not. And we know the WHO has in fact changed the definition of what a pandemic actually is. Causes of death, again, a very controversial topic as to, even with regards to COVID-19, as to what was the actual cause of death and the inflation of figures, public health practices, standardizing diagnostic procedures such as highly problematic PCR, to develop and establish international standards with regards to food, biological and pharmaceutical and similar products. And clause V of Article 2, Joe, to generally take any necessary action to attain the objectives of the organization. So this is far-reaching power. And while it may seem one treaty and may seem a good idea in theory to those who don't understand the implications, for us at the World Council for Health, it clearly represents a power grab, consolidating the undemocratic mandates and lockdowns, etc., that have been forced upon people, sort of conditioning them to accept a new normal, and paves the way for these digital vaccine IDs, no access to services, places, and products, and constant biosurveillance.
Mm-hmm. It becomes interesting because the concept of almost a one world health governing body, it's not a concept that is all that far-fetched when you consider what this treaty is, although that concept is often stated as conspiratorial. Is it too far-fetched to say this is a bit of a one world sort of health policy?
Not at all, because the Director General of the WHO, Tedros, who is not in fact a medical doctor, himself speaks in that language of one health, one world, one WHO. In other words, one size fits all, what we say goes. But when people are harmed through their policies, then of course they have no accountability because of diplomatic immunity that the WHO has given itself. And so this is not an organization that countries should be entrusting their healthcare to. As the World Council for Health, we believe in a community-focused, ethical, decentralized way of approaching health, which leaves power in the hands of the people to make the decisions that are best for them. And we know that people have innate wisdom. They have an ability to make sense of things, which is why our partners from Australia to Zimbabwe are standing against this proposed pandemic treaty, and have decided that we will, in fact, as the World Health Organization, as our partners and a growing number of public, campaign against this treaty and ensure that it actually does not see the light of day.
If people aren't in agreement and they see issue with this pandemic treaty, what can they do?
Well, I think most importantly is to educate ourselves about what the treaty would say, look at the WHO Constitution, in particular Article 2, 19, 20, 21, and 22, to familiarize yourself also with the Syracuse principles, which protect natural law and the rights of the person, of the living man, woman, and child, more so than these conventions, which serve the interest essentially of multinational corporations and profit over people, as opposed to people over profit. So it starts with the education, and that's what we call for in our open letter, which can be found on our website, worldcouncilforhealth.org. So there's 3 calls to action in that first letter. A, to raise awareness about the implications of the proposed global pandemic treaty, which one can only do if one has the education and access to resources. B, to call for national campaigns that protect natural law and democratic constitutions. And C, to join credible civil society organizations such as the World Council for Health. And within that open letter, Joe, on the website, you will see various links to, for example, the Syracuse principles, as well as the town hall that the World Council for Health held last year, in fact, when we started to see the direction in which this was going, while the world was very much distracted by the waves and whatever latest distraction was going on in the establishment media. But essentially, it comes down to realizing, is this the way we want to live for the rest of our lives? Is this the path we're going to choose? What are the implications for us, our children, our children's children? Can we be refused the right to food because we do not want to live in an undemocratic, fascist way? And that could easily happen if you don't have a digital vaccine certificate. The WHO could say, well, you've signed this treaty as a country, so you as the president, you're now obligated to put the following measures in place. And this would, of course, lead to massive unemployment and poverty and general, a state of the opposite of well-being, which is what we all truly want. So therefore, mobilizing around this issue is essential to take back our power.
Yeah, is it fair to say that it's almost like one path is a path of fear and surveillance and the illusion of safety, and one is almost this philosophical reassessing of what type of life do we want to live? What does it mean to live? Do you think all of these questions play into this decision here?
Absolutely. One has to philosophically look at what is the meaning of life? What has our life meant over the last 2 years? Certainly, this chapter has woken more people up to the realities of who we are and what we face, who's really in control of the world, and how we can change that. But it's both, the alternative is both philosophical as well as practical. But I really do think the last 2 years have been a massive awakening again. And I do see people not taking this pandemic treaty lying down and deciding to say, enough is enough. We will make decisions about our lives. You've had your time. We don't believe in you anymore. And if you leave us alone in peace, we can move on. We'll take it from here.
Mm-hmm. That's well said, and I totally agree with the sense that there's a lot of people that are questioning very, very deeply the institutions, and I think this is why conversations like this are important, and the work that the World Council for Health is doing is incredibly important. I want to say thank you, Shabnam, for coming on and sharing this with us. I think there's a lot for people to consider here.
Absolutely, there is. And of course, if there are organizations that want to join and become partners of the World Council for Health, please connect with us. info@worldcouncilforhealth.org. If you want to become a partner, you'll find a space on the website to actually do that. And of course, if you want to donate towards our Stop the Treaty campaign, that's the hashtag. You'll be able to do that via the website. And just remember that there is a better way, and we can and are building it and creating it together.
Well said.